thanks for stopping by for another episode of MFA Writers. It means a lot that you all take the time to listen, and it really means a lot when folks take time out of their day to write a kind review. Recently, a listener who goes by the name Redwood Obsessed wrote on Apple Podcasts, "Thank you. Beyond grateful for the love and commitment you bring to this podcast. I have learned so much and am excited to be a guest one day after I graduate." Thank you so much, Redwood. I'm obsessed with this review, and I too am looking forward to one day having you on the show. Keep writing, and hopefully we'll talk soon. You can find MFA Writers on Instagram and Twitter, as well as mfawriters.com. We love to hear from listeners, so feel free to shoot us a direct message on one of those platforms, or an email at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. And if you have a minute to rate or review the show, the best place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. Doing so will help boost our podcast as we try to boost these amazing writers. Also, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, you can apply at mfawriters.com. On that same website, you can also click the support button to support us financially, if it's within your means. Or you can do so by going directly to buymeacoffee.com/mfawriters. Finally, as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Oli Peters. Oli is a second-year MFA candidate in poetry at the University of Notre Dame. Oli's work is forthcoming in Annulet, Diagram, Dragonald, and Mercury Furs, and her past work appears in Pleiades, New World Writing, Rain Taxi, Heavy Feather Review, and Abozine. Her dance performance piece, Body Glyph State, will be performed at the 2025 Iowa Choreography Festival. Today, Oli has brought 4 poems to read for us.
Cool. Okay, yeah. So I'll start with my looking at or watching series, which is a new project I'm working on now that my thesis is over. So the first one is watching the improvised, invented language monologue in Furia. Enter stage, loin wet, underwear distended and glistening from within. Find light, mark, stand, reach. Yank blood purple organ from crotch, hoist and re-sound, tongue tilted toward freedom, mouth not mimetic, mouth non-mouth, uninformed, whorl of future reform, non-mouth, letter agonizer, bleep pure, unword, re-sound, past mass production of sound, into declaration of sound, inimitable tilt, sound not free in the eyesing of tongue and mouth, ear repeat. I hear no thing, I hear raw. Was it the exalted, fluid me? Did it in you? Was I in it? You. Word is raw organ, crotch birth, yanked from glistening loin wet under. Word is fuming, drum is eye is hoisted, livid. Looking at Piccinini's We Travel Together. Creature beholds creature in unlux verse. The axed syllable resurrects in skin crease between rib and hip. Pornographic syllable. I'm thrusting on form. I'm writing a gargantuan utterance. I'm picking out on vulgar gerunds. A foul hand molds to chest. And now it's a study of hair. Halation. Blonde wisps glazed in light. Syllable in lock I want to twirl. Knees deliver a eulogy kissing the ground in schematic anguish. English's brute pageant palms the dead. Word needles under lush tissue. English is an intravenous feeding tube through which love is gorged and regurged. Watch it slip in and out, masterly and prismatic, biled and tinged. It's a classic question. What if your butthole was your face? Are you a monster for asking? Are you a monster for having a butthole? Crotch hooks, shadow hooks, glare. You're sleeping nude. I'm sorry for right. Fingers wilt over mine. It's crass. I'm sexed on memory's bunk. Deformed, long, tendon, idiot, toe. Gross assemblage I ogle. I'm sorry. I'm divulging you so commonly. Looky here. Would it kill me too? Okay, now I'll read 2 poems from my thesis project. Every single poem in the project is called Spell Drive, so I'll be reading 2 Spell Drive poems. Spell Drive. Dancer sees axes, sice. Dancer executes maniac convulsions in the face of light. Corpse loosened eons back. Sun a teeming whip of ache. Gravid with the honey to go when we swung on the set in pendulous unsure. Oracle bone unhacked at. Tree not gallow. Vellum a calf. Your neck so far from inscribed, if it ever wasn't, it wasn't here. I'll borrow you my blankie while I'm mouthing off. Bah. Dancer, I'm teething on Ledouille, forgive, garble, phoneme, whorl. I long hug close. Symbols coo. Spell Drive. Alphabet taught splice. Alphabet a knotted molecule, a choreography. Who taught dancer jump? Who taught braid, glyph into vein, liver, tract? You were once so chromosomal. So and lettered. O is a luckless snare. Tongue bloats past mouth, inoperable gizmo. Euphemism arrives as love placing potato to ear for infection. Remedy, berry, lunacy in moonstruck. Dupe, oh. Acidic strand, dancer, are you as influent as me? Transmission is a lone word, a nowhere seesaw, dead on and codeless. Dancer, I duplicate, page, replica, casting, zilch, while love snags on the plate, the chains, recombinatedness, and sentence mutates to sequence, mutates to home stretch, at the end of which you and I chase to meet. Cool.
Ali, that was so cool. Thank you so much for reading that, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so your work is super interesting, and artistically you have really eclectic interests. You write a lot of poetry, of course, but you also write short stories and book reviews, and you do work with dance as well. So I'd love to hear more about your creative background. Have you always had these various creative interests?
No. I feel like, so I went to the University of Iowa for undergrad, and my freshman year there, I took like a introduction to lyric poetry course, and I just was obsessed. I was like, this is the weirdest stuff I've ever read. I don't understand it. Like, these people must be geniuses. And I just kind of like fell in love with the contemporary poetry that I was reading. And of course, like being at Iowa, it's like everyone's like will encourage you to like write. And so I kind of like drank that Kool-Aid, I guess. And and so then I was kind of exclusively writing poetry and like some short stories here and there, but like poetry really had my heart. And then I graduated, and then for like 5 years, again, I was just kind of like writing poetry alone in my room. And then I came to Notre Dame, and the program is like so encouraging of like hybridity, crossing genre, stuff like that. And I took a class from one of our fiction faculty, and just like for an exercise, wrote a short story in it. And I was like, oh, that was super fun. And then just like something unclasped and unlocked. And I was like, oh, I can actually like do whatever I want.
Right.
And I think also because you have to like focus so intensely in these poetry workshops, because I'm there for poetry. I had to focus so intensely on my thesis project. And so when I was getting like poetry started to feel stale, then I'd be like, let's do something fun, write a short story. Yeah. And then my interest in dance stuff came the summer before I started at Notre Dame. I just randomly went to this contemporary dance performance at the Walker Museum because I was living in Minneapolis, and which is Fioria, which is the piece that I read. And I was like so rapt by it. I think, again, I kind of had like a parallel moment to the one I had as a freshman in my like undergrad as like in the lyric poetries class. I was like sitting in the theater at the dance performance and I was like, this is crazy. I do not understand this. These people must be geniuses. Like, how can I get my claws in there and try to understand it?
Yeah, I think that's so interesting that you heard these things and you were like, that's weird. I don't understand it. And you moved towards it, because I think a lot of people would be like, I don't get that. I'm going in the other direction. Right. And at the same time, I think there are a lot of people who feel like they have to choose a lane with writing and stick with it. Right. But you are kind of embracing writing in these different genres, embracing blurring the lines between genres, writing hybrid stuff. So what do you think are the benefits of trying out different genres and blurring those lines?
Like I mentioned, for me, it's just like, if poetry starts to feel like I'm getting too serious about it, I mean, my poetry also is like, my looking at series is a bit more infused with a sort of like humor and levity, but my thesis project is all the spell drive poems are like elegies. They're very solemn, they're very serious. And I was just like, yeah, I was reading it. I was like, man, I'm like a fun-loving girl. I'm like, so I was like, there has like, yeah. So then also, especially writing fiction, like honestly, when I write, I'm just kind of like trying to make myself laugh, in addition to getting like lost in characters and stuff. So yeah, for me, it's just like the different forms allow me to access different parts of my creative self. But then also, before going to Notre Dame, I was kind of like afraid of like different genres like infecting my poetry or something, because I like poetry just for me is like, it was like this little pearly bubble that I wanted to keep pure. And of course I was reading a lot of poetry always. And maybe your work kind of gets infected by the authors you read, which I think is like a good thing. But yeah, but I was like, well, what if I start writing short stories and then I start writing prose poems? And for some reason I was like, no, I don't want to write prose poems. So I don't know. But then like I worked through that fear, and it isn't true. It's like my work has only benefited and expanded from, having little tentacles and everything kind of.
Well, I want to talk about your process a little bit. I like that idea of when you write fiction, you're just trying to make yourself laugh. You're just trying to like have fun in the process. That's something that I'm always like trying to do, right? If I'm not having fun writing a story, I'm like, there's something wrong. It's not going to turn out well, right? I should be having fun when I'm drafting something. So I love hearing that in relation to writing your fiction, but I also want to hear about how you write your poems, like how they come to you. How long does that process take? Do you find that you have an idea and it comes out quickly, or is it something that you like kind of slowly work at and slowly revise and rewrite and all that?
So I write pretty much daily, and I have for a really long time. And so for poems, I can't go for more than like my maximum's like 2 hours at a time because my brain is just working so hard. So the ekphrastic series I'm working on, it's so nice because you can just be like, the idea that I'm using to generate this poem is a thing. Like it is this piece of art. So it's almost a little bit cheap for me. I'm like, just like a cheap way to get an idea. Yeah, but with like the spell drive poems, those took a while of me just kind of like carving at. It felt like I was like, there was like a big slab of marble. I'm like carving at it to try to get to something. And I stumbled a lot. Like there was an entire poetry workshop spring of 2024 where I was just like turning in these like poems that like I didn't feel great about. Like people were really encouraging, but I was like, this is like not it. And then like all of a sudden I was just like, oh, this is how I include the dance ekphrasis. This is how I include elegy. This is how I include language poetics and more lyric stuff. And it was just like one day, like all these disparate elements that I was working with just kind of merged. So that's like conceptually how that came together. But then in terms of just like writing, it takes me a week to write a poem. I I don't know why. It just always takes a week. Yeah. And if I'm working on it every morning for like 1 or 2 hours, it's just word by word. I'm like, if this word isn't perfect, I can't get to the next one.
Well, I know you also told me that experimentation is really important to your work. And I'd love to hear you talk about that, because experimentation might mean different things to different people. So what does it mean to you, and how do you integrate experimentation into your process?
Yeah, I took a translation workshop with Johannes Johansson, which was huge for that. That was also spring semester, that same semester when I was turning in these bad poems to workshop. And reading the translation theory was really helpful because I could apply it to how I was integrating ekphrasis and dance notation into my thesis project. But then also we had to do like a final portfolio translation project. And so I chose to use these phrases of motif laba notation, which is a type of dance notation. And so I found a video from like the 80s where it was like horrible music and people were dancing out these dance notations in this like class at Ohio State University or something. And so I would like look at the dance notation phrase, watch it danced, and then translate it based on a key, like the symbols. And then after seeing them danced, basically write a prose lyric poem, like ekphrastic thing. And again, like I was writing those and I was like, these are trash. These are like so stupid. I can't believe like Johannes is encouraging me to do this. Yeah. And I kind of like would avoid them, even like doing them. And then one day I just sat down and I was like, let's bust these out. And I think it was like literally all day from like dusk till dawn. I just like did them. And I still don't know if they're good, but they were a big step into entering a space I'm not comfortable in. That type of writing I wasn't as careful with it as I am with like the Spelled poems. And so I think just like it was much more like just spit something out and like trust it.
I think that's probably a pretty common experience for people when they're experimenting with something. They try something that's completely outside the box, and then they think to themselves, this isn't working. What is this? I don't know what this is. Like, and then if you allow yourself to continue down these rabbit holes that may or may not lead anywhere, and be comfortable with them maybe not leading anywhere, you can get lucky, right? You can stumble onto something really interesting, something that really resonates. And so I think, I mean, I'm curious to hear what you think, but I imagine a big part of the difficulty is getting to that point where you feel comfortable being like, okay, I might spend a lot of time doing this thing and it might go nowhere, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it's interesting because so the 5 years that I spent out of undergrad, like I was just like writing poems, sending them to no one, like, so I was comfortable with them not getting published. I was comfortable spending all this time with them and writing and like not necessarily knowing what would happen. But so then when I got to like the MFA, I think inherently in any program, there's like a pressure to publish. There's a pressure to produce a publishable manuscript. So that was like a new pressure to deal with, which I think like once that starts to creep in, it's very damaging to my writing process. But at the same time, I was in these classes where they were just like, do the weirdest thing you can. And like, so the classrooms were like genuinely a space of exploration for me, at least. And they felt like in the best way possible. It's just like, they're just like garbage bins, like, you know what I mean? Like, in a way that feels like really Yeah, like it combats like the pressure to publish. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's a super common experience in MFA programs. It was for me. It was for a lot of people that I've talked to, that you get in there and inherently a lot of the talk is about what comes next, publishing, getting an agent, putting out a book, all those things, right? And I found exactly the same as you. I found that was so detrimental to my writing, to actually like drafting stories, was when I was starting to think about publishing already. And then, we talked about that idea of like trying to move towards the fun in your process. I found at that point, it was just all pressure. There was like no fun. And so then it became a lot of work to try to get back to having fun with the process. And realizing when I was having fun that the stories I wrote when I was having fun were so much better than the stories I was writing before. So that's an interesting thing to hear that you went through that as well. And I think anyone listening who's entering an MFA program or in a program right now and maybe struggling with this, it's common. It's common. And it's something that, you should be aware of and maybe try to combat before it gets too far down the road.
Yeah.
But it's great. It sounds like Notre Dame has created some spaces, some classrooms where that idea of trying to perfect something is pushed outside the classroom walls and you're allowed to just dig around in the trash and see what you find, right?
Yeah, which has just been super useful to me. And I think writing will inevitably, I think, sometimes feel like your soul's being like hacked at, which is what my entire thesis project felt like. But it's like a different sort of awfulness to like have a part of that hacking be the pressure to publish. Like it's just so poisonous. And yeah, because you end up in this place where you're writing for other people instead of writing for yourself, right? And I'm of the opinion that first and foremost, at least in the early stages of a piece, you really should be writing for yourself. You should be writing whatever you find interesting and fun and exciting. Okay, so you mentioned these few years you spent writing alone in your room, and I want to talk about that because you applied to MFA programs right out of undergrad and you didn't get into any programs, which you said ended up being a great thing for you as a writer. And that's because of that time you got to spend writing alone. I want to hear about that. What was that time like, and what did you discover during that time? So right when I applied out of undergrad, I was like pretty devastated. I didn't get it anywhere because I was like, I thought that was the only path forward. Like all the writers I admired had these MFAs and stuff like that. One of the reasons it was beneficial is because COVID happened like immediately after. And I was like, that would have been a totally different experience to go to an MFA program during COVID. But so then there ended up being 5 years between undergrad and grad school. And right when I popped out of undergrad, I was like writing these contemporary lyric poems is like how I think about them. And I lived in Montana for a year during that time. And in Montana, like my writing just changed immensely. Like I don't know what it was. I mean, I was like isolated on a ranch. So, but all of a sudden I started writing this like super weird, like more like language poetry stuff. And I like the first poem I wrote that was like a deviation from what I was writing before. I like apparently just discovered the apostrophe key on my keyboard. And I was like, oh, what if I take out certain vowels of words and like just replace them with an apostrophe and like, which was like revolutionary for me. Like this little key on my keyboard did so much for me. Things just got weird after that. And then to kind of like prepare another portfolio, I took like an online writing course with Shai Watson, and it's where I first like showed those weirder poems to people because I was I was like, these are like unreadable, like these are unreadable. But then people were like, no, like maybe they are, but also like I read them. So yeah, I'm just now realizing I'm like there was pre-Montana and there was post-Montana for my writing career, or my not career, my writing path. But both a good and a bad thing about like the way that I came to poetry was that I was like in an institution.
A really well-known institution that everyone knows as the writing place, right? I imagine that creates some pressure.
Yeah. And like, so my professor in undergrad who like I took that lyric structures class with, and who then I like took as many classes as I could with the entire time as I was Robin Schiff. And I'm like absolutely indebted to this woman. Like, but at the same time, I was writing to get an A. I was writing to like impress my workshop peers and like impress the professors that I respected. So I wrote like them. Like I wrote how they wanted me to write, which, like I said at the time, that was like, since it was kind of like all I knew, it was pretty authentic to me. But yeah, then I reached this place in Montana where I was like, this isn't working like it used to. Yeah. And then I realized I was able to parse out like what I learned in the institution of like poetry writing was serving me and what wasn't, in a way that I hadn't been able to before.
I think that's super interesting. I love the idea that you were like, apostrophe. Mm-hmm. Why would I put this into my poem? But also, why not? And just giving it a shot and seeing what happens. I mean, like, this is kind of fun. This is kind of interesting. And then somehow, through that process, coming to a new kind of writing, a new kind of poetry, a new way of writing poetry that felt more authentic to you. And that's going to look different for every person, right? Like I had a professor in my program who told me every writer goes through the process of first like learning the rules, like learning the basics, learning how to write stories. And often those are kind of emulating people, emulating writers, and then you get to a point where you say, okay, I know how to do it. Now I can just do whatever I want. Now I can get weird with it. Now I can have fun and find out who I am as a writer. And it sounds like that's what you went through during this time period. Maybe the lesson here is we should all just like go to Montana for a bit and chill out on a ranch and see what happens.
If you can. I mean, it was really useful, I guess. Like I said, I'm just not realizing. I think Montana had a lot to do with it because I was there. I was like on this ranch and I was like, I'm literally writing like for nobody. Like,
yeah.
It was like me and the elk. And I was like, the elk can't read my work. Like, I was just like, who am I trying to impress with this? Like, I'm not trying to get it anywhere. I'm not trying to publish it anywhere. Like, yeah.
I think that's great. That's so cool. And such a great thing for listeners to keep in mind that, yeah, sometimes you just got to get out of your own head, get out of the institutions, get out of the whatever spaces create pressure for you and just see what happens when you have some fun. Okay, so then you applied to programs again. You ended up at the University of Notre Dame, whose 2-year MFA program in creative writing offers tracks in prose and poetry, though they seem very open to and even encourage hybrid work. So what was it that drew you to Notre Dame's MFA?
So basically the faculty, like Joelle McSweeney and Johannes Joransson, I've read their work for a long time. I really appreciate them. Yeah, and then all the places I got like waitlisted my first time like wanted nothing to do with me the second round, again because like my writing changed so much. Yeah, and so I think the biggest thing was just like the faculty, and their work was emblematic of like the work that I was aspiring to write as well.
Yeah, so the direction your writing had moved in kind of seemed to align more closely with what they were doing. So in what ways has the program fostered those hybrid interests, those experimental interests of yours?
So Joelle is my advisor, and it was like every time I like turn in something to her that I think is like absolutely unpublishable, verging on unreadable, like she doesn't bat an eye. Like she's just like, okay, cool. Like, yeah. So I really don't know if any experimentation is like too extreme for them.
Well, the website also mentions how besides taking workshops, students have the opportunity to take courses in gender studies, art and art history, book arts, languages and literatures, film, television, and theater. And I know you have taken classes in medieval manuscripts, theater and theory, playwriting, and translation, among others. So what have been some of your favorite and most influential classes outside of the workshops?
Yep. So the medieval manuscript class, the title is Eating, Kissing, Damaging Books, a medieval manuscript as multisensory object.
Nice.
So that really helped me because I was thinking about how to include this dance notation, which kind of made the material of the page kind of pop out to me, and the landscape of the page starts to feel more physical. That class helped me reimagine the corpus of the book. And also it was just really fun. It was very rigorous. But we got to go to special collections, and our professor was you have to smell the book. You have to put your nose in the book to fully read the book. You have to touch it. You have to look at how it's been damaged and stuff. So we didn't get to eat any books, which was a disappointment. But and then also that was the first class that I took out of the English department, and so I also had to me just kind of the way that you can just riff and spitball in a poetry workshop does not work in a medieval manuscripts class. So you have to be more critical and analytical, and that was also kind of just made my brain work a little bit differently. The theater and theory class is also really useful which I'm currently in, absolutely fascinating, I think, especially because I've been working with dancers and the way that they conceive of 3D space. I'm how can I push that into the page? Yeah.
All right. So within the MFA program itself, I'm curious to hear about the sense of community. Do you feel like the program does a good job of fostering relationships between students? And have you gotten the kind of mentorship from faculty you hoped for?
Yeah, mentorship, I'd say for sure. Like I mentioned, I think almost every faculty member in the creative writing space has just encouraged me to explore. That's kind of the best case scenario for me. It gives you the confidence that you need. So for some reason, I just needed an authority figure to tell me yes. And then I was oh my God, now I can do anything. And yeah, in terms of community, I mean, it feels very small, which, yeah, I mean, I've met some dear true friends through it, which has been, again, best case scenario. What's interesting about being at Notre Dame is that it does feel a little bit like you're kind of in this creative silo. It kind of feels like our department, the creative writing department, is one of the more robust arts departments. So and people at Notre Dame, I mean, are very focused. I mean, every undergrad, I feel is a business or theology major. And I mean, I'm teaching Intro to Creative Writing right now, and it's they just kind of are shocked that I let them do whatever and or just think creatively. So yeah, so I'd say it's an interesting dynamic being at the university. But once you get out of the university, there's actually there's some pretty robust community-based art stuff going on.
All right. Well, I want to hear a little bit more about teaching at Notre Dame. The website says all admitted MFA students receive a full tuition waiver, a fellowship providing a full stipend, and health insurance subsidy. In most programs, students teach in return for those benefits. It appears at Notre Dame that you only teach in your second year, and before that, you have other responsibilities like editing at the Notre Dame Review or doing community outreach, things like that. So I'm curious to hear what kinds of responsibilities students have in their first year, and also what teaching has been like in your second year.
My first year, you have different fellowships. So my first year, I worked as a poetry editor for the Notre Dame Review, and yeah, it was pretty standard editor position at a review or magazine. Reading all submissions. And then I also had a team of 6 editorial assistants. So, organizing all of that. And then I would just send them off to the poetry editor and he would decide. So that was, just pretty standard. And then, but also there's some people have fellowships with Action Books, which is a really unique indie press based out of Notre Dame. And and then some people do like campus coordinator. So they do like lead like MFA workshops with like undergrads and graduate students. And then another person's like community outreach. So getting people to volunteer with like community organizations. So second year you do take like a pedagogy course for one semester during your first year where you kind of like prepare for that. I really love teaching. Like it is a lot of work. Getting my syllabus together, it took me so long. But yeah, so fall semester, I just like, my students were just like super into it and super engaged and like willing to experiment and play. And so I teach intro to creative writing. So, and you completely make your own syllabus and then you just like send it off to get it approved. And so in my class, I just do like a fiction unit, nonfiction, creative nonfiction, and then poetry. And then we do a big workshop at the end. And some people do intro to poetry and some people do intro to fiction.
And how much is the stipend that you receive? Because I couldn't find that anywhere on the website.
This year it's $25. So I don't know. I think that's pretty good for an MFA program. And like the fact that you don't have to teach your first year, and South Bend is really cheap. So yeah, for me, it's been enough. I mean, I haven't saved a ton of money, but
it's been plenty to kind of live comfortably and get by.
Yeah.
One thing you said that has been unique about your experience in the program is you've gotten to travel a lot through the program. You've gone to Ireland and Paris, as well as to conferences like ALTA and AWP. So in what ways does the program encourage and support that travel? And what were those experiences like?
Yeah. I mean, I hope it's not like tacky for me to say, but Notre Dame is a fancy place and they've got cash flow and they have, which I didn't quite realize like going in. But if you're willing to like seek out like independent research grants, and there's a grants office who have like these really wonderful advisors who like help you work on your proposals. Like, yeah, if you're kind of like shrewd and like know where to look, like, and you write a strong enough proposal, like they are not opposed to funding creative projects. And so the Paris thing, I went to Paris for 2 weeks on this like graduate research grant. There's like a European studies like funding source, and because I went to go see some dances to write ekphrastic stuff into my thesis, and then also to go to this really cool dance notation archive to like better fit together all of that. And it did really help. And then Notre Dame owns a castle in Ireland and they have a summer writing program open to undergrads and grad students. And if you get funding for it, you as a graduate student, you get to like live in a castle for a month in basically a national park in Ireland, and there's like a chef who cooks your meals.
Wow.
It's crazy. It's so crazy. And and so then like in the mornings, I think they're gonna maybe like change up how the program works exactly for grad students, but when I went in the mornings, you're like in a creative writing class with a few different faculty members. And then in your afternoons, like just stick you on a tour bus and you like go explore Ireland. So
not too shabby.
Yeah, it was absolutely crazy. I mean, every time I told my family and friends, they would just like laugh. It's like, it was ridiculous, lap of luxury. And then, so the Alta funding, Alta is a translators conference, and you get a little bit of money, like you get $500 graduate professional development funding per year, just automatically as a grad student, which like people just use to go to Alta pretty much, or use to go to AWP. And then Alta, since it was kind of like this extra thing, it was also just in Milwaukee, so it wasn't expensive to go. But yeah, I got just a little bit of funding from the grad school for that.
So speaking of that Alta conference, I hear you presented an experimental dance notation translation project there that will be performed at the 2025 Iowa Choreography Festival. So I have to hear about that.
So body glyph state is what I ended up calling my translation project, which I did in that translation workshop. And then a few of us who were in that class, we were just like, what if we just like sent in a panel proposal? And kind of to our surprise, Alta said yes. So yeah, so that's what I presented on. It was really cool. Alta's awesome. Translators are so awesome. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, I highly recommend going. And yeah, and so I just kind of randomly know this dancer in Des Moines, and I ran into her and like mentioned it to her, and she was like, oh, like I help out with this like choreography festival. It's like really low stakes, so it's a good place to like try out getting stuff performed. So yeah, like I said, I've been kind of sheepish about the body glyph state project, but then I presented on it at Alta and people thought it was cool, and I was like, it's crazy. And then this like dancer friend, like I sent a proposal to the choreography people and they were like, wow, this looks cool. So yeah, now I'm trying to figure out how to take it from paper onto a 3D stage space. So again, I've just been like really surprised with like where all the dance stuff has taken me. Like, you know, I got to go to Paris and do all that stuff. And yeah, I never thought I'd be presenting at a translation conference. So on dance notation, but yeah, and there was also another girl there who like does dance notation translation stuff. So.
All right. Well, before we wrap up, I want to give you the last word. What is one way in which the MFA experience has been different, for better or for worse, from your expectations when applying?
Yeah. So like I've kind of mentioned, I have like thought I was just a poet for so many years. And I thought I'd be just coming to Notre Dame just to do poetry more intensively. So working within so many different genres and mediums has been the biggest unexpected thing to happen. I also thought that publishing my work was the answer to all my problems. And then I started getting just a few things published and I was like, oh, it's the writing. That's the satisfying part. So yeah, that's been an important thing to realize.
It goes with what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, that idea that, you know, how like focusing too much on publication can affect your writing. I find once you're published, that can become even more enhanced. So it's just like a constant process of reminding yourself it's about the writing, which is easier said than done, right?
Yeah. And like, yeah, I was like talking to Joelle and I had like my manuscript between us and we were both just kind of like looking at it at one point and she was like, you know, you don't have to publish this. And I was like, I don't. And it's so like, it's a revolutionary thought sometimes. Like you don't ever have to publish anything if you don't want.
Yeah. And when you're drafting something and playing around and experimenting, nobody even has to read it at all. You don't have to show it to anyone if you don't want to. So that should take some pressure off. But somehow us writers, we are pretty good at putting pressure on ourselves. So. Yeah. Well, it's been super fun talking to you. I'm super excited for you, excited for your work, and excited to see what you do next. So congratulations on finishing your thesis and turning that in. Good luck on the rest of your final semester at Notre Dame. And thanks for stopping by and chatting with me.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been lovely.